Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film Trap, and we are joined by a very special guest, Eric. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself and have people get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much, Jen and Sarah, for inviting me on here. I'm Eric Ekwueme. I run the Instagram account E Squared Film Reviews, and I have been a film nerd / enthusiast for about 7 years now, since the Movie Pass craze. We were talking about me being the poster child for Movie Pass, because before that I was a TV person, but once I was able to watch a movie a day, I truly became a lover of film, and that's stuck well past that company's untimely demise.
Love it. Yeah, something about seeing just a broad swath that really ignited that excitement in you for movies. Love it. Well, we're so excited to have Eric on the pod. We've been following his stuff for a while, and really excited that he's going to be with us for this conversation about Trap. So, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Trap.
A father and his teen daughter attend a pop concert only to realize they've entered the center of a dark and sinister event.
Dun dun dun! Oh my gosh, what a great premise. All right, let's start off in Movies and Us tradition with our one-sentence summaries for this film. And Eric, as our guest, do you want to share yours first? What's your one-sentence summary for Trap?
Sure thing. So my one-sentence summary is M. Night is in his girl dad era.
Love it. Yes, he is. There's so much girl dadding happening in this movie, and it throws you for a loop with how it unfolds. So I'm sure we'll talk about all of that when we get into the specifics. Sarah, what is your one-sentence summary for Trap?
Mine is putting the trap in entrapment.
Oh, I see what you did there.
I like that.
Nice.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good. My one-sentence summary is protect the roof of your mouth because this movie is real crispy.
Or extra
Nice.
fried.
Yes. Or turn up the heat on that oil, you know? Okay, well, let's start off with our initial high-level review and thoughts about Trap. In this first section, we won't spoil this movie. It's an M. Night Shyamalan movie, so we recommend going in with as wide of a canvas as you can. So if you haven't watched Trap yet, we won't spoil it quite yet, and then we will include a spoiler later. So I'm intrigued to hear for you, Eric, how did Trap work for you? Did you have a good time? Did you enjoy this movie? What were your high-level thoughts about what M. Night's doing with Trap?
Yeah, I think for me, this movie was the perfect encapsulation of the M. Night Shyamalan experience. You know, it had a lot of hype going into it from that very first trailer. M. Night is known for those high concept, sort of weird premises that gets us all intrigued, things that I believe most folks in Hollywood would immediately pass on. But because the man has his own money, he's able to write and produce these things himself. And then you go in, and at first, with those high expectations, you might be let down a little bit. And we'll talk about this more. But that first, I would say 30, maybe 20 to 30 minutes of the film, I almost felt like we were in for something pretty bad. But then a twist comes, and not necessarily in this movie a specific twist like a Sixth Sense or whatnot, but a change in tone, or at least a change in my understanding of what the tone in this film was, created the most fun final 45 to 70 minutes of this. So I ended with, I had a pretty great time, with the caveat I saw this movie for the second time, and I will say this is not a film to rewatch. Please don't do that to you. Enjoy it the first time and then leave that experience behind, because the second time you start to see how quickly everything falls apart. But overall, I thought that this was a good M Night Shyamalan movie and exactly what I expected.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into some of the specifics of when that shift happens that really it ignited for you this movie in the first half. And just your second rewatch review is really funny. I could see that. It makes a lot of sense. All right, Sarah, what were your thoughts about Trap? Did this movie work for you? Think about this M. Night Shyamalan experience.
It is an experience, that's for sure. So I might be the problem. I feel like this is one of those movies where I might be the problem. I do this thing when I'm watching movies sometimes, and I get hyper fixated on certain details that then kind of ruin everything. And that is what happened to me in this movie. I went in and I wanted to like this movie because I like M. Night Shyamalan's really audacious and ambitious ideas. And I love the premises that he comes up with. They're so interesting to me. And so I was excited for this movie. I was like, yes, let's go. And there were moments when I would find myself getting sucked in. Josh Hartnett gives such a good performance. He would just suck me in. The editing and the filmmaking components would just suck me in. And then I would start to think, and logic would enter into the chat. And that is when it would kind of all fall apart for me. And so I might be the problem, but I would find myself like starting to have a good time. And then I would think too much and then stop being able to like immerse myself in the premise. And I kind of went through that roller coaster a few times throughout this film, which was just an interesting thing to be conscious of while you're watching a movie. So I think for me, there's a lot of really good elements to this, but I was let down by the story. And I think if there were certain parts of the plot that were maybe done differently, then it would be a little bit more plausible, and I think it might be maybe a stronger film. So yeah, wanted to like it. There's a lot of good things here, but I think my brain might have ruined it a little bit.
Yeah, and I will say that that is exactly what happened to me on that second watch because you get to the
Oh,
end of
okay.
this, and we're not going
Yeah.
to spoil anything yet, but you get to the end of this and you want to watch it again from the beginning just to understand what M. Night was putting together. And the second I started using my brain from the beginning, I realized I think he was just messing around with us. Yeah, I don't think he really had that much of a serious idea of what was going on, and that's probably why this plot fell apart for you pretty quickly.
I am cracking up imagining you, Sarah, watching this movie, just being like, I call BS. Nope. And I think there are a couple of moments where when I was watching this movie, I was like, oh, that's going to be a little trinket in Sarah's basket of things that don't work at all. But I'm excited to hear which ones really were the biggest ones for you. Um, Overall, I had a great time with this movie. I think it's such a fun summer flick to go see, and it's a thrilling kind of like vibe movie just to go and experience this. It's I what I love most is that it's a narrow and contained premise, which is really fun. And I think seeing, especially in the first hour of the movie, how M. Night has our characters have to figure out how to weasel their way out of this very clear premise with very clear stakes is really, really fun. The second half of the movie, so the moment where we go to a different space and inhabit a different space without giving too much away, I think that's when the movie, I think, tries to take a different turn, and it doesn't totally work for me. So I had like the best time in the first hour, and then the second hour, there were some things that left me wanting something a little bit different, which is just really interesting because I think it's maybe flipped for you, Eric, right? Like the second half really worked for you, and the first half, you were wanting maybe a little bit more or something different, which is kind of interesting.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. So I can't wait to get into that because probably exactly when it flipped for you, once they left that venue or left to another space, that's when the movie started working for me.
Okay. We're going to have to duke it out. We'll have to chat more about and unpack all of those different pieces. That'll be fun. All right, well, it's an M Night Shyamalan movie, so we've tried our best to talk about this film with as much vagueness as we can, and I will free ourselves from having to do that. So, this is your spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Trap, we've shared our high level thoughts, and now we're diving into all of the juicy details of what unfolds in this movie. So let's start with maybe Eric, if you want to share a little bit about that shift that happened. So now that we're in spoiler Terry, we can talk about how they leave the stadium and they go to the butcher's home, and we meet his family with Lady Raven, and a whole bunch of things happen after that. Tell me your thoughts on that shift that happens, and maybe why that really worked really well for you.
Yeah, I think so. The moment this movie switched from being something that I felt was a little stilted to something that felt free and really fun was actually when they had Kid Cudi come in, basically looking like a Targaryen, um, as the Thinker, and that character was so laughably out of place. That's when I realized that this was supposed to be a comedy and this was supposed to be an absurd comedy. And so the rest of that happens at the stadium, and then once they leave the stadium, I believe Josh Hartnett just went full method into being this serial killer who is so tightly wound and so trying to be the perfect dad. I think he let that go, and he had the most fun that I saw in that film. The first half, Josh Hartnett felt like a robot to me, talking to everybody, felt very much practiced and stilted, whereas in that second half I saw all of him become the true villain that I think worked really well. Um, I also believe that the first act and the first half of this movie was a little held back by M. Night's, I would say, affection for his daughter, who was playing Lady Raven. This is why I said that he's in his girl dad era, because clearly the subject of this movie is a dad and his little girl, and the first 10 minutes is him being the perfect dad. Is like what any dad would want their daughter to think of, is like, you're giving me this best experience. But the fact that M. Night's daughter was Lady Raven, and I mean, 30% of the first hour was just film footage of her dancing and singing. It was clear that he was just so enamored with her as a performer. And then in that second act, of course, she has a bigger role, and I don't think she's necessarily the strongest performer, but it allows Josh and I'm blanking on her name, but the woman that played Cooper's wife, to play off of her. And I thought that that gave her a little bit more to do than just singing and dancing. And this is probably, and I'll kind of turn it over to Sarah here. This is probably what frustrated you. The logic of that entire second act makes zero. There is nothing about that logic that resembles how the normal world or the physics of the normal world work. But I just was so into it because it was clear that they weren't trying to make something that worked. They were just trying to be as absurd as possible.
There were so many times, especially in the second half, that I was laughing out loud. And I was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be laughing, but whatever you're doing is hilarious right now. But so there's plenty of things in the second half of the movie that I was like, that does not make sense. But I think for me, it started kind of right out of the gate. So and then the more information that you learn about this sting operation, the less that it makes sense. And so at first I'm going, okay, you have hundreds of police officers, SWAT, FBI for this concert. Who is paying for this? And how did they authorize this? How much money is this costing the city in overtime alone to do this? And then you find out they actually don't know who the butcher is. They don't know what he looks like. And you learn that it's just based off of a scrap of a receipt, that they would have hundreds of personnel here, armed, tanks, all of the things that they have. based off of a tiny little bit of a receipt. How do you know that he's going to be there? That doesn't make sense. And then there's 3,000 guys and you're going to question all of them. That doesn't make sense. So like the whole time, anytime they showed like a group of police officers, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Why would they all be here when they don't have complete information? Who authorized this? This doesn't make sense. Somebody is getting fired for this whole operation that's going sideways. I don't understand. And then things obviously just kind of go haywire from there. So it was just, it started out illogical to me, and then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a part of where that first act just it kept leaning more and more into things that weren't logical, but not necessarily absurd. So it wasn't as
Mm-hmm.
funny as I think the second act was. There were so many times in that first act where it was so clear that he was a serial killer that I was like, these must be the
Right?
worst FBI agents ever. Because this man is walking around literally throwing people downstairs, staring longingly at a fire
Yeah.
alarm, putting get grease in a fryer, which I watched it a second time. I have no clue how he got
Uh-huh.
behind there without anyone seeing him because there wasn't a diversion beforehand. So it just was so illogical that it, similar to Sarah, it kept taking me out um, of what that first act was supposed to accomplish.
I'm convinced Cooper is a wizard because there's a scene later on in the movie where he's apparently in the car posing as an FBI agent, and then the next cut is like he disappeared and he's walking away, and there's there's throngs of people around that car. So you're like, how would he have gotten out and no one would have noticed when they all are clearly trying to watch this car to ensure that uh, they're gonna get their guy. So it just there's just some like big leaps that I'm like just asking us to make, which is fine. I mean, it's all in good fun, but I think it takes away a little bit of being able to really like soak in the real stakes of the danger that someone might be in, like Lady Raven, because you're like, well, he's gonna just maneuver his way out anyway with magic.
Yes, I literally wrote down, is he invisible? I was, or in my mind, I was like, maybe that's the twist. Like, this is a Sixth Sense type of thing, and he's actually dead and invisible. But nope, he is just a magician.
You're a wizard, Cooper. Well, that's another thing that I think maybe this was a me with the wrong expectations problem too, but I was expecting or waiting for a bigger twist at the end. And it's pretty tame. I mean, there's some good twists along the way, but they're definitely not what I went in knowing this was an M. Night Shyamalan movie with like big sweeping like twists that fundamentally change how you view the rest of the plot and everything. I was, I think, waiting for something like that. And had this not been marketed and branded and with his name slapped all over it, perhaps I would have been like happily pleased with the way that it unfolds in the ending. But I think the like big twist at the end is the whole Rachel confession. His wife essentially is behind the whole thing, and I mean that whole scene in general. I'm like, he's a serial killer. You should know that she's probably drugging your food right now as you turn your back and walk away from her as she's holding a plate of things that you're about to consume. You know, like you'd think that he, if he was suspecting that she's behind it all, would have expected more from her. But I think I was waiting for more, and we don't get it, which is fine. But gap in my expectations for sure, which could totally be a B thing.
I almost feel like the major twist in this movie was almost the fact that they gave it away in the trailer. Like in another
Mm-hmm.
version of this
Yeah,
film, him being the killer is the
yeah.
twist. Like that was in my mind. Looking at what this premise could have been, that would have been the twist that he's actually the butcher, and I don't know, maybe his family is in on it or something of that nature. But it's almost like the lack of a major twist is what M Night Shyamalan was going for.
Yeah, no, I had the same thought too because I also hadn't watched the trailer. I somehow managed to avoid spoilers for this going into it. I don't know how I did that. So when like 20 minutes into the movie, you realize that he is the serial killer, I was like, wait, what are we doing? Shouldn't this come at least like halfway through, if not later? So I thought that that was really interesting, an interesting choice. And I think for me, I was wondering while watching if this story could have been a little bit stronger if it had been narrower in scope. You know, so instead of bringing all of the police in like 3 states to this concert, what if it's just like a really tiny team, and then you can focus on that cat and mouse piece of it. And I think maybe that could have been really thrilling if it was smaller in scope, a smaller team, and he has to outsmart them, and it's not, you know, this overwhelming army of people that are after him. Then that could give more like flexibility to maneuver through some of these things, and maybe create spaces for some more fun twists if we have better knowledge of who the foe is in Cooper's mind, if we better know, you know, who this FBI profiler lady is, and we're able to see them kind of more evenly matched, and it could be more of a chess game between them. I just, that might be a terrible idea, but that was kind of what I was wondering while watching, if something like that could be thrilling.
No, I definitely don't think that would have been a terrible idea. That is, I think the issue with this big sting operation occurring is that it almost felt like it was too big to succeed. Like if he was a good serial killer, he just would do nothing. Like he just wouldn't bring any
Right?
attention to himself.
Yeah.
Like the main thing that they have is that it's a guy, and it's a little incongruent because at the very beginning they say we know it could be either a large black man, a white man with a tattoo, an old
Hmm.
man. So they don't have any information at all. And later on, Lady Raven somehow describes him perfectly. Um, but it just felt like the logical thing for him to do was just be a dad in that moment, and then he would have gotten away just fine. Because what was the questioning the FBI agents would
Hmm.
do?
Yeah.
Um, but if it were an FBI agent that he's known has been on this case, that he's had to narrowly evade time and time again, it would have been really interesting to see a serial killer have to do that while also trying to be a good father. It's like the worst bring your daughter to work day.
Yeah, that would be really terrible to have those two worlds collide. And the film does do some of that too, where he's being serial killer slash dad. And she's like, Dad, what are you doing? Why are you being weird? So I think even being able to capitalize on more of that and seeing his two worlds kind of colliding at once, and seeing how he responds in the pressure. And we get a little bit of that, but I just wonder if there had been more of that, if that would have been, I mean, I think I would have enjoyed it more, but I think I was also maybe watching this movie incorrectly.
And I really had to think about that after the movie ended too, because I think I had wanted a different movie than what we got. I wanted that thriller movie. I actually wanted it to actually stay within the stadium the entire time and have it truly be like a cat and mouse process movie where we get to see the serial killer figure out how to outsmart the authorities and try and escape. Like I would have been so satisfied with a 2 hour thriller experience of this cat and mouse process movie. But there's a really like maybe interesting reading, Eric, that you'd mentioned earlier, with the Kid Cudi piece kind of clicking for you around like so much of this movie is so like larger than life and incredibly playful in a really interesting way that I wonder if that was the intention, is that this is all kind of silly and ridiculous even from the beginning, and we weren't like meant to take it too seriously, and it's a little bit like spoofy, making fun of the way that sometimes these like serial killer thrillers play out and how implausible. So much of it is. And that, like, watching this movie through that lens might be like such a different experience. And really, it's a comedy. I think you mentioned that earlier, Eric. Like, perhaps this is a comedy and it's supposed to be absurdist and playful and kind of ridiculous and not a serious thriller process movie that I was prepared for and gearing up for and perhaps wanting. But that's such a different lens to view this movie that perhaps was more of the intention that M. Night was going for.
Yeah, and I will say that I think some of the disappointment people and even myself have had with some M Night movies in the past is that he has these absurd premises, these things that logically within a movie you can't explain and actually bring any sort of cohesion to it, and he plays it so seriously. Like there's some movies where you're like, this is absurd, but you're playing it like a dark horror movie or a
Mm-hmm.
dark thriller. Like just have fun with it. And this, you're right, this movie did feel like he finally had an absurd concept and said, I'm just going to have fun with it. I'm not even going to try to make it dark and moody, because I know that you all will, the audience won't like that as well because they think I'm taking myself too seriously. So you're right. I like fun M Night a lot.
Fun, playful, silly, absurdist, goofy M. Night. We're here for it.
About a serial killer. Like if that is it, M Night right there.
Yes. Because, like, looking back, so much of what is ridiculous about the ending, if you view through a different lens, it's hilarious, you know. And then it's, if that was the intention, then by all means he nailed it, because Sarah's out here laughing, we're all out here like having a good time with that ending. And I think it's the thought came when we see Lady Raven pretending to like be his mom to like kind of like get inside of his head and use that like psychological tactic on him. You're like, Lady Raven of all people. It's not like, and you know, FBI interrogation, like her, she would be the one using it. Then that whole scene is just so silly and ridiculous where they're having that conversation in the car, that that's when I was like, this is off the rails, man.
What sort of briefing did Lady Raven
Right?
get? Because
Yeah.
she has his whole profile, and she's like speaking to him as his mom. Like she's a pop star. She's not a part of this sting. If
Well, and
anything, it should be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, like, to your point earlier, they didn't know who he was. So how could she get an FBI briefing on the exact keywords that she needs to say when she confronts this very specific dude? You know, like it just doesn't make sense. That's why at many points in this film, I was like, I just need to stop thinking about this so much and just have a fun time. But I struggled to do that.
Imagining this film with like a real life pop star like a Taylor Swift, and just thinking of how insane it would be for her to get in a car, just her and this dad and this daughter, no security, no secret agents, no one following her at all. It's just it's hilarious. It's actively is so funny that she became the de facto hero in the story.
Yeah. And I felt so bad for her driver too. I was like, buddy, I'm
Jeremiah.
sorry. You're probably going to get fired after this. Like, he just did
It,
not do his job.
Jeremiah had zero situational awareness because
Right?
the second they pulled up to that house and he like did the stare off with Lady Raven and then patted him on the shoulder, I would have called the backup right then and there. Jeremiah was so clueless.
Mm-hmm.
He was. It was very sad.
I am fascinated. I'll go back to this idea of M Night being a girl dad. I am
Mm-hmm.
fascinated with the conversation that goes on in Hollywood around quote unquote nepo babies. Um, And I see what M Night is doing with his daughters because literally a month ago, we I just watched The Watchers, which is his other daughter's debut film, and I see it and I think, this is when nepotism goes right because it truly just feels like M Night believes his daughters are the most talented individuals on this earth and that his gift to us is allowing us to see their talents. Like it doesn't feel malicious or they're stealing jobs from somebody else that could have had them. Like it truly just feels like M Night is a proud dad to the point where he casted himself as the proud uncle of Lady Raven.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating part of the industry that is so competitive, and especially also like seeing the way that like these kids and stars grow up around, like immersed in this industry and having an understanding of it. I was having a conversation tangentially related about some of the Disney stars, like the Olivia Rodrigo and Sabrina Carpenters of the music industry, and how much a lot of their talent has been able to be like nurtured and grown, where they have that level of comfort like in front of the camera or on stage, and how that allows them to show up and perform with such confidence that they wouldn't have the capabilities to, if you're a discovered or an identified star that has to be trained up in that arena, and that stage presence matters so much. And so then you translate that into the film industry, and I think the fact that when there's the funding and production that comes from him for him to create the stage for his kids, it's a little bit of a maybe different conversation than when they're using other connection points to get their kids into the limelight. But the even him baking the theme of being a girl dad into the plot itself is, I think, really fascinating, really fun, because there's just so many of those sweet little moments that we get to see throughout. Like at the end of the movie, when his daughter finds out that her dad is the butcher, but homegirl runs over and gives him the biggest hug, and I'm like, I don't think this has hit you yet, but that was, I guess, really sweet. But also, you just found out your dad's a serial killer like 30 minutes ago. So I would expect there to be
It
a little bit
truly
more
is like
processing.
a dad. A dad's like it's truly like a dad's fantasy, not necessarily being the killer part, but being like my daughter would love me no matter what I've done. I just ruined basically her life, and my daughter still runs up and hugs me.
Yeah, I was like, I have so many questions. Sarah's got a special docket of
Mm-hmm.
characters in movies that need therapy, and I think we've got another one to add to the list.
Well, and I think in that moment, the other thing that I was thinking of, not only is Cooper the butcher and he's a serial killer, that's very, very bad. She should have qualms based on that. But more than that, he kidnapped and threatened your idol. Like, and you're still gonna run up to him and hug him after that? He was so violent towards this woman that you have such strong feelings for and you love her so much that, like, that is where I was like, that's BS. She would be so upset at him for that. I don't buy that she would hug him, but it was a sweet moment.
That
It's
is
fine.
that is a great point. Once again, imagine this being Taylor Swift and a Swiftie,
Right?
Swiftie's father
Yeah.
kidnaps Taylor, threatens her, tries to kill her, and then you run up and you give him a tearful hug goodbye as he goes off to prison.
Yeah. It's as if he's like captured, like wrongly captured, and this is her tearful goodbye for being separated from him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, maybe just. Then I was like, it's a big dramatic situation. Perhaps it really hasn't hit the girl yet, because that's a lot. That's a lot to process in 30 minutes or however long unfolds. But I
It's
think
true.
Eric,
It's
your
true. That's
description
a
of
good
it being
point.
like a father's dream scenario is so accurate.
Yeah, you can tell that M Night was really putting himself and his hopes into this film.
Yeah, there are so many moments throughout the concert where Riley is like, "Come on, Dad, I want to experience this with you," or like, "You're missing out on this." And there's like one part where like I think it's when they get the swag bags and there's a bunch of stuff, and she's like, "Dad, we can be matching." And there's like so many lines like that where I'm like, man, I don't. And I mean, I don't know very many teenage girls anymore because I'm a full grown adult. But I remember when I was a teenager and none of my friends were that close to their dad. So all of those little lines, they just made me smile because it is really a girl dad fantasy at that point.
This is not how teenage girls engage with their dads, especially like in this moment. Riley would be so focused on either the fact that she got to meet Lady Raven, so that would be cool, her social media, because she was taking videos, so she would probably be trying to text friends and things like that. She wouldn't be focused on her father's experience, especially because he almost actively ruined the experience several times by leaving, by taking her out, by randomly like, let's go get a drink over here versus somewhere else. So I just think that it was unrealistic for Riley to be so enamored with what her dad was thinking and doing rather than more enamored with like her experience itself.
No, that is so true. I feel like it's usually the parent that's more focused on the kid being like, "Are you going to be okay? I'm going to go to the bathroom." Like, "Are you going to be okay?" And the kid's like, "Yeah, dude, just go. Like, let me like I'm vibing. I'm dancing, you know?" Like she would not bat an eye to be as concerned as it's depicted like multiple times again and again, which I mean, part of it maybe it helps serve the function of adding to like the stakes of him being weird and her noticing that. I think that was effective, but um, I think they overdo it a little bit, and perhaps this is part of your larger thesis, Eric, around like this is a father's dream scenario for the daughter's just like, "Dad, I want to share this experience together." So, yeah, I think it doesn't check out, but it does add to the feeling of he knowing he's the butcher and then also seeing him as a dad. I think was some really fun like emotional dissonance that I felt throughout the movie.
Mhm.
That was like just a fun experience to go through over the course of this movie, where you see these really sweet moments between the two of them, but then cognitively you're like, "But you're a serial killer," and having to play with those differing truths is kind of fun. It was fun for me.
I did have another question or more observation with this movie, going along again with my thesis, and that is, does this movie hate mothers? It feels like every time they depicted a mom in this movie, it was in the most unflattering light. We had the mom of the bratty teenager who was bullying Riley. We obviously had his mom, and then even though Rachel was sort of the hero in the end, she wasn't depicted in a strong light. It felt like she was almost forced or terrified into making her decision rather than resolute in trying to protect her family in making her decision. I just thought it was interesting the way they depicted moms in this.
That's a fabulous point and a fabulous observation. And uh, I wonder if and I just wonder if like, was all of that intentional? Because it all leads up to this whole like mommy issue thing that Cooper has with Grant. Uh, him hallucinating and believing that Grant in the doorway with her silhouette like was his mom speaking to him. So is this all like intentionally this echoing trope that all like culminates into that like root issue motivation for Cooper that traces back to his childhood? And again, is this kind of a spoof of all of the plethora of content that we have and fixations that we have around serial killers and what motivates them and why do they become the way that they are? Like the tons and tons of podcasts and Netflix docu series and all that kind of stuff that like we just were kind of obsessed with. Like, is it playing on all that kind of stuff, or was that kind of an unexpected pattern that emerged as the movie unfolded. I it's fun to think about how much was like carefully and intentionally designed by M. Night versus kind of these uh, like accidental patterns and things that unfolded, because I could see it going either way, and it's kind of gray. Whereas I think some films, it's very clearly like, or a little bit more obvious, like this was all very intentional, or this was a byproduct of perhaps some of the feelings of the filmmaker. But in this case, like it's so somewhere in the middle between being serious and then also being absurdist that I don't know. The needle could really point one way or the other, which is kind of fun to think about. One of the things that again I was didn't check out for me at the ending, which is related to a point made earlier around Rachel, his wife, is that she does a whole confession uh, to the person that is known to be a serial killer to her at this point, and she's essentially telling him all of the things that she did to thwart his plan or to go after him. And I'm just like, why do characters do this in movies? It's like the same uh the dumb protagonist in the horror movie. Like they always stay in the house, they always open the door, they always choose the least wise decision. And so here is this woman just telling this very dangerous man all of the things that she did, that's just riling him up. And then you see him express his anger by the end of it, and understandably so. But I'm like, homegirl, we need a little bit more. We need a little bit more finesse here, because you're making this a far more dangerous situation for yourself. And again, one of those things where I'm like, was this all intentional? Because this happens all the time in movies, and is he kind of spoofing on all of it?
One thing I couldn't tell, and maybe you all can let me know if this part was intentional, was the teapot a sign to the FBI to like get in line? Because I know like it went off and Grant came in and she turned off the teapot. I couldn't tell if they had planned this, they had pre-planned this before, or if this was just something that was more spontaneous.
Well, because she was already making the tea, or like she had already turned on the kettle when he comes in, right? Like I thought that she had already
Yeah.
placed the kettle on there. I honestly, I'm not going to give the movie that. Like these police were very incompetent, in my opinion, after watching way too many police procedurals. So I'm not going to give them that. But I think it is a good point though around like what was the plan here? Because she they send the kids away and she's like, no, I just need to be alone. So then do those two like hatch up this whole scheme right there and like stage this out and be like, okay, so now what you're going to do is you're going to keep them sitting here for a very long time and we're just going to wait. And then when it gets really, really dangerous for you, then we're going to come in and we're going to tase this guy like 700 times after he hallucinates his mom. Okay? Break. Let's go. Like, it's just.
And the
It's
pie.
so
Don't forget the
silly.
pie.
And the pie.
He has to go
The
and get
pie.
the
Oh
the
my
drug to put into
gosh.
the pie. So that was prepared ahead of time too. Part of the plan.
It's just, I did wonder though, like, if we're going to do this whole thing and we're going to confess and we're going to say the receipt and we're going to get him all riled up, like, is anyone filming this? Is anyone recording this? Like, do we have documented proof of this? Because he kind of, I mean, he's admitted to it many times and he tried to murder some people along the way that we have live witnesses now. But like, wouldn't that information and this confrontation be helpful in some regard? I don't know. I wanted to know what the plan was. And I think that's what one of the things that bothered me about this movie is I wanted that cat and mouse, where the really talented police officer comes in with a plan and they're going to like trap, and they have all of these contingencies, and you see just like how intelligent both of these people are as they're kind of sparring and facing off against each other. And it would be this really like fun intellectual match between them. Like that's what I wanted, which is not what this movie is, and that's fine. But I think in that ending scene, I wanted just a little bit more strategy from somebody in this, and there was no strategy to be found, only pie. And that's fine. Pie is great. So let's have pie.
Sarah, you bring up the best point here, and that is these it's not that Cooper was a mastermind serial killer. It's just that these cops were not good. They were borderline terrible at their jobs, because the final scene, and I'm interested in y'all's thoughts on that final quote unquote reveal, is a direct result of all the cops doing the most idiotic possible thing leading up to him being in that truck. They tase him 30 times and allow him to gouge out the eyes of an FBI agent. And I'm not here for anything with police shooting any individuals, but I think the gouging of the eyes of the FBI agent might
Right?
be the line where, you know what, maybe a non-lethal shot can happen, because this man clearly is actually turning into a monster based off of those electrodes.
Maybe that's what it is. Okay, so his wizardryness is fueled by like there's like some combination between the electricity and his wizard properties that combine together, and then he becomes the Hulk, and they just didn't realize it.
Yes.
And that's they didn't do their research to understand that he's a wizard, and they didn't understand that a wizard cannot be electrocuted. It just increases his powers. So there we go.
And he's also using the
This
force
is
to like mind control them all too, to like give him
Absolutely.
so much freedom as he's walking to the car, you know? Like so much freedom. Homeboy could just start
so we
running.
have the Hawk and Jedi mind control. Is this all Disney here? Did Disney fund this? Because this is their way to combine those two franchises. Because you're right, it was some sort of mind control. The man looks at a bike, and they just let him
Yeah.
grab it. They just let him,
Right.
like
What?
there was no reason. Why are they showing this man kindness?
Also, like he was handcuffed in the front. That's not a good idea. Like, let's at least make it more difficult and handcuff his hands behind his back. Like, let's restrict his range of movement just a little bit here, guys.
No one in this movie knew how to use handcuffs, because he
That's
handcuffed
true. That's
one
true.
hand for Lady Raven to that film. I was like, look, I'm not rooting for you to win, but this is a stupid idea to just handcuff one loose hand to that rail.
And she's so tiny. Like, how did
Yeah,
she not just slip her hand out of it?
Yeah.
That's what I couldn't understand when she was banging against the rail. I was like, you're so small. Just slip your hand out. You should be fine.
there's not a child lock on those windows, nothing. So I am now on Sarah's
I'm
uh
so
train
sorry.
here,
I'm
that,
sorry.
well, no, I still enjoyed this movie. I still enjoyed this movie, but Cooper is just a like a dumb killer. He's not a mastermind, because this so many things he did here were wrong, and the only reason why he wasn't caught is because the cops just happened to be a little bit dumber than him.
Which I think does lend to your comedy theory.
Yeah.
You
I'm
know, I
saying.
Yeah,
I think I think that really you really hit the nail on the head with that one.
It's the only explanation.
it's like the
There are some movies
almost
sometimes where I'm like,
slapstick, like almost
this
there.
all doesn't make sense, therefore it must be intentional. That's the conclusion I arrive at. We pendulum swing all the way to the other side. We're like, this has got to be like genius, well designed, and like I just viewed it the wrong way, but this was all intentional. And viewing this as an absurdist comedy, it's a great time. It's a great time. I love it.
And I will say, in in an interview, I only watched slash read like one or two interviews with M. Night about this. He did say that he laughed the whole time writing this movie. That
Wow.
he like this was the movie he most enjoyed making because it was he laughed the whole time. So I think he is fully in on the joke of it all, and really is at this point in his career, he's got the money. No one can say no to him because he's doing this all himself. So if he wants to create a funny movie that acts as a showcase for his daughter to potentially become a bigger R&B star, he's going to be able to do it and have a lot of fun with it. And give us Josh Hartnett in one of the best Josh Hartnett roles in a while.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. We need to talk about Josh Hartnett because he does a great job in this movie.
There are some fabulous close ups of his face where only half of his face is shown, and he is emoting with every muscle in his face. And the framing of the shot, too, of only including the one side of his face, just his eye, a devilish smile, packs a punch, goes a long way.
I mean, devilish smile to the nth degree. It is so incredible. You said every muscle in his face. It's so incredible the way he's able to mold his face into that unsettling smile. And there were areas or shots where his hair kind of had these little points to it. It wasn't so obvious that they were making a devil point, but it's just he had this look to him that if his face was painted purple or red, he would be the devil.
There's some great eye twitches, too, at one point that I really loved in the first half. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I
Him and
loved
his
those moments because it was just these little tiny ticks and like otherwise he seemed kind of okay. Like it was the beginning of his spiraling out of control and you could see like if you weren't paying attention or you were just like a normal concert goer like he maybe wouldn't seem out of place but because we have the context and we're studying his face you see all of these little tiny shifts and these little ticks and stuff and each one of them seemed so menacing because we have the context and I loved seeing him kind of transform throughout the film and I love the point that you made Eric at the beginning of our conversation that in the second half he just lets go and just kind of goes all out and looks like he's having just a great time and it is so much fun watching him absolutely kill this role from start to finish.
and he got his I mean not to invoke Marvel again, but he got his almost Marvel moment when he for some reason took off his shirt before I guess he was planning to kill his wife. I didn't understand why he undressed in that situation, but I was like, man, Josh Hartnett still's got the body for it, you know?
Yeah, it's so true. I had that same thought during that scene. I was like, why is this necessary? But like, all right, I ain't complaining about it. Sure. By all means. By all means. It makes no sense.
It really doesn't. And I mean, and I love it. I love it for it.
Mhm. Okay. Any other last big thoughts about Trap before we wrap?
I think my last thing. This isn't really that big of a thought, but I just want to give a shout out to the individual who worked at the t-shirt stand. I thought he had fun in this movie, and it was fun to see him interact with Cooper as like this genuine guy that didn't pick up that that this individual was acting weird, and then for M Night to include that final scene like right after the credits started, I thought was the perfect end to what was a comedy.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely solidifies that he brought such a good comedic presence to this. He was so much fun to watch. Honestly, I did want to spend more time with that character because he was just so fun and so dynamic. And I was like, can we just go back to like the t-shirt stand? And I just want his commentary on people. He seems like he would be a great people watcher and just have so many great things to say about all the humans in this venue. So I just wanted to hang out with Jamie a little bit and experience his humor some more.
Yeah, we'd all like to request to be on his shift. Whatever slot that he's in, sign us up.
And he gave a little pep talk to that woman. He says, "You got this. You got this," before leaving. He just seems like an all around great guy that gives up passwords way too easily.
Yes. Also, I'm pretty sure that if this was a real thing, like you should not be disclosing this to like a random concert goer, you know? Like,
right?
Way to cause some mass panic. But he's so good natured that you're just like, what a kind, generous soul sharing the information with us. All right. Well, we covered a lot. This was our review and discussion of Trap. It sounds like overall we all had a great time with this movie. We got some things that don't pass the smell test, but I think we've arrived at a new thesis around this being a absurdist comedy, and M. Night is having the time of his life, laughing the whole way writing this film. So love that lens, Eric, that you brought to this conversation. Is so great. You can find Trap available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Movies and Us. And a big thank you to you, Eric, for joining and sharing all of your thoughts, opinions, ideas, and spicy feelings with us on this conversation. Where can people find more of you on the interwebs?
Yeah, thank you both Jen and Sarah for including me in this conversation on this absurd movie. You can find me on Instagram at E² Film Reviews. It's at @2_ film reviews. I post all of my reviews there, and I'm pretty active on Threads as well.
Awesome. And we will include links to that and all of that in the show notes. So make sure to go follow and check out more of Eric. He's got some great thoughts and opinions, always reviewing films that are coming out. And we love to see it. So yeah, our name Movies and Up sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts and theories and opinions about Trap. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at MoviesandUsPod, or you can email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Alien Romulus. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you again real soon.